Hi, everyone, and a very happy World Compassion Day from all of us at the Global Compassion Coalition. My name is Matt, and I am the Chief Communications Officer at the GCC. And it's really wonderful to welcome you and to have you with us this afternoon, morning, evening, whichever time zone you might be in. So today is a day when we celebrate and champion the power of compassion. And right now, that feels like it couldn't be more important than ever before, as we witness the tragedy continuing to unfold in the Middle East, conflict continuing in the Ukraine and across the world, and we see leaders assemble together for the next round of negotiations on climate change, with warnings of an imminent climate collapse. And while these events, they might feel quite distant, although the anxiety feels real, they may feel distant, and the impact that we can have on them might also feel distant. There is a way in which our own personal choices, our motivations, our actions can influence them, as can the mindset and motivations and values of those who are experiencing them. But how can that be the case? How do we use compassion as a mindset, as a value, to try and change societies or shape societies in the image that we want? Thankfully, for me, I am not the person who's being made responsible for actually answering that question today. We have a wonderful panel of 5 representing politics, activism, and psychology. And shortly, I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves to you. A couple of housekeeping, or maybe one main piece of housekeeping, which is just that if you have questions that pop up throughout the conversation, do put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Alex, our brilliant tech guy behind the scenes, will direct you to where that needs to be. And we will try and get to them, especially towards the end. And then one other thing before I go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves, I just wanted to take a quick moment to say that one of our panelists, Mick, he has very recently suffered a close family loss, and we just wanted to make everyone aware of that. Mick still wanted to be with us today. He still wanted to be part of the conversation, and we are very, very glad that he is, but we felt it important to let everyone know. And so perhaps as we do our round of introductions, just thinking about that, I will ask everyone not only to say their name and their background, where they're coming in from, but perhaps why compassion is really personally important to them, either in general or at this time. So we're going to start with Debbie, who is someone who I have had the pleasure of working with for quite a number of years now through the work I've done with compassion in politics. And then after Debbie, we'll go to Mick, Reggie, Marcel, Tanya. I'll remind everyone if you forget during midway through that journey. But Debbie, over to you just to introduce yourself.
Well, good afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are. First of all, thank you so much to Matt for that kind introduction. My name is Debbie Abrahams. I'm the Member of Parliament for Oldham East and Saddleworth in the UK, which is North Manchester in the UK. I've been a Member of Parliament for coming up to 13 years now. And the reason I got into politics was my previous work on inequalities. And this is also what drove me into the work with Matt and Jennifer and others. And I'm currently the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group for compassionate politics.
Thank you, Debbie. Mick, you are next.
Hi, my name's Mick Cooper. I'm a professor of counselling psychology at the University of Roehampton and a counselling psychologist. It's a real pleasure, and I really wanted to be here. I think for me, compassion has been such a fundamental value in my life around and given such a sense of meaning personally about the importance of striving for equality, care, and being with others in a way that really brings out the best and the deepest in all of us. And the work that I've done recently is about just how much compassion and care contributes to a society that can really function well, and that it is possible. I guess ultimately I really believe that we can forge a more compassionate, caring society, and there are ways that we can do that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mick, and thank you again for being here. Reggie.
Peace to all. Reggie Hovert here, dialing in from the DC metro area in these woefully tragic United States, it might seem. Why is compassion important to me? I'm a certified yoga and meditation teacher, as well as an activist who believes that we can't expect the world to be what we aren't, right? So like if we don't do the internal work of bettering and loving ourselves, how in the world can we expect the world to change, right? So compassion and social change is an inside job that must manifest through our discipline. And either through my teaching or activism, I try and awaken that spirit, not just within myself, but within all those who cross my path. Love and grace to all.
Thank you, Reggie. Marcella?
Hello, everyone. I'm a clinical psychologist and a researcher at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. And I'm speaking to you all from right in the center of Portugal, from Coimbra. My research focus over the past 15 years has been around compassion and the power of compassion to transform our lives at an individual, but also at an interpersonal level. And my interest in this field of work and of life, because I've also made this a mission, I believe, came from the power of compassion to heal inner suffering, in particular shame, and how we can use compassion as an antidote to suffering in ourselves, but also in our relationships with others and in our society. So yes, that's how I came to compassion.
Thank you, Marcella. And last, no means least, Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Singer. I'm a psychologist and a social neuroscientist here in Berlin, Germany. And I'm heading a social neuroscience lab here in the middle of Berlin. And I have been working, I guess, on empathy, compassion since 25 years. So it pretty much feels like a whole life. And what I'm mostly doing is to investigate the effects of compassion training. So if you practice inner work and compassion, what does it do to brain, behavior, immune system, mental health? But I have also been, funny enough, there was a time I was professor for economy in Zurich. It's a funny story how I got there as a psychologist and neuroscientist. So I worked with micro and macroeconomists on new models of caring economy. So we worked how psychology and neuroscience can inform new models of a caring economy based on care instead of basing it on achievement. And so I'm more and more interested also in how inner change can inform social change. And is that the same, or what do you have to think about when you do the bridge between inner to social, right? That's a big question. So yeah, that's about me.
Thank you, Tanya. And we're definitely going to get on to some of those questions around the caring economy and inner to outer change as we go through. Just as a roadmap for everyone who's listening, we're dividing this conversation into two halves. So in the first part, we're going to sort of dream about what a world based on compassion would look like, hopefully picking up some specifics given the panel's range of different places of work and skills and experience. And then in the second half, we're going to start to look at how do we actually get there. And I'm going to start with Reggie, because Reggie, you mentioned, I suppose, in your introduction around the importance for you of the world outside being a reflection of your world inside. And I wondered if I could give you maybe the dubious honor of sort of just starting out with a description of what that world outside might look like if we were to base it on that mindset and value of compassion.
I live in a world where conflict is almost unavoidable, right? And whether it be the political stuff or the activist stuff that I do. And so we got to have tough conversations rooted in love, right? You know what I mean? Like the problems that we face individually and collectively require us to approach them with the severity and the root and the love and grace in order to effectuate solutions. Like me pointing fingers at you and screaming at the top of my lungs isn't going to do anything but like maybe make my finger hurt and give me a sore throat, right? So I believe that a world rooted in compassion can hold massive problems with the grace and concern that are required, but also just like the truth, right? You know, we're having a racial reckoning, among other things, in these United States. America has been delusional for years about its racial circumstance. We've been delusional as a society about like the impacts of our behavior on climate. And so I believe the world is rooted in tough truth with love and grace. to talk honestly about the situations where we find ourselves, because absent this banishment of delusion, we're going to perpetuate suffering. And like, that's not only not rooted in compassion, it's also not rooted in any meaningful measure of success.
Beautiful. Thank you, Reggie. I think holding massive problems is just going to be so important for this conversation, because it's such a different orientation to think about how we do solve the issues and problems in the world, and being able to do that in a way that brings collective solutions. Debbie, I'm interested in your perspectives, especially on health, just at this point in the conversation, because as you said in your introduction, that's an area of professional background for you. And I know your work in Parliament in the UK has focused on well-being at the heart of basically sort of public policy and government decision making. What does that mean in practice?
We can't hear you.
You are muted. You have to unmute.
So sorry about that. I wasn't too sure if I was being muted myself or if I'd done that. I was just going to say that it means that we have to have a complete shift in how our politics is undertaken. So my focus has been around not so much well-being, although that's part of it, Matt. It's a focus on inequality, and inequality is rampant across the UK, but across other countries as well. And unfortunately, Reggie, you probably know, it's together with the US, the UK is has a very unenviable record of our life expectancy is actually declining. We're one of the, as I say, with the US, and I think it's also Iceland, three advanced economies where life expectancy is declining, and that is because of the real inequality that we face. And I think I would not say that all parties then have such a massive difference that we couldn't work together to resolve this. There will be, I can identify in different political parties, people who will want to have a fairer society where we can all get on and be the best version of ourselves. But that's not always the case either, and there will be other vested interests as well. But in that sense, Matt, how we change our politics from an adversarial process which we currently have, one that's very much subject to outside influences, and as individuals you become less effective. I would like to see a real shift in how we do our politics, so that so that we can have the things that Reg has been talking about, so that we can have absolutely a recognition that in the north, for example, of the UK, we have a worse situation around our life expectancy than other places where the socioeconomic inequalities that drive that life expectancy are so much worse, and it have been for decades. We all need to take responsibility for that. And I think fundamentally as well, we need to recognize the importance of leadership. And I would say, what Reggie was saying about, issues around conflict. The cultures in our society are driven by our leaders. And when you've got poor leaders, you have poor behavior. And we can all look at the examples that we've seen in different countries across the world where that's the case. And we can also pick out the good leaders where they have made a massive difference in different countries as well. So one way we turn away from the selfish and self-centered, the individualistic types of society, and the policies that underpin that to one where we are, as people have just described, are caring, are compassionate, are cooperative, working together in the interest of everybody and for society as a whole, not just themselves.
Thank you, Debbie. And just briefly before we move on to Marcella and education, I was just going to ask you about that, your point around the worsening inequality in life expectancy. And it's a problem that certainly here in the UK, we hear of so often, and we're so aware of, certainly as you know, in the public. Why has that become so entrenched and been allowed to persist, do you think?
Who's that for?
That was for Debbie, sorry.
Sorry, Matt. Can you quickly recap on that?
Yeah, that's okay. You brought up the issue of sort of entrenched inequality and the worsening conditions, if you like, in the UK and the USA. And I just wondered, from your perspective as a politician, why do you think this hasn't been properly addressed?
Well, it gets back to what I was saying at the beginning, Matt. It is around vested interests and poor policy. So we know that life expectancy is driven by socioeconomic inequality. If you look at all the evidence, whether you look at the work of Professor Sir Michael Marmot, you look at the work of Professors Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, all the evidence shows that the smaller the gap between the rich and poor, the better everybody does, the better trust, the life expectancy, social mobility, and so on. So we need to get policies right. And if we just reflect back on, we've just had what we call the autumn statement, which is like a mini budget here in the UK. And if you look at some of the policies there, I know they're going to be regressive. So Tanya was talking about the modelling that she did around well-being. And I'm very much a supporter of well-being economics. And it is anything but the decisions that have been made around that will help and promote the well-being of all. It will, as we have seen, it will be promoting unfortunately, the ongoing affluence and wealth of a small minority of people. So it's an economic policy that is in the interest of the few, unfortunately, and instead of looking about how we, as I say, can support everybody, especially in the environment we have at the moment. I'm sure you said Marcella there, Matt.
Sorry, I said we were going to move to Marcella. Sorry, creating unnecessary confusion there. So Marcella, you do well. I know that you do brilliant work on compassion in education, and I wondered if you could just talk us through briefly what those studies have shown, particularly, and I suppose I'm interested not just in the role of taking compassion coaching, or how we want to describe it, into schools, but also just what that mindset is, what's behind that motivation in terms of how can we shift our education to be more compassionate, and what that looks like.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Yes, a big focus of our recent work over the past few years has been on directing compassion and cultivating compassion into schools. We know that schools are a central part of the cradle of our society. That's where values are formed, pro-social motivations can be fostered, a shift from a competitive, individualistic mindset can be promoted to this shift from competition to cooperation and compassion and pro-sociality. And we know that schools are facing an unprecedented mental health crisis and social crisis as well. And they have been becoming increasingly stressful environments for all the educational agents that inhabit those settings, from pupils to teaching staff, non-teaching staff, parents. So we wanted to develop a whole school approach where we developed and adapted a series of compassion-focused interventions, compassionate mind training intervention, that we apply to teachers, non-teaching staff, pupils, and parents. And in the basis of this model is this idea that if we want to promote compassion, we need a shift in how our environments operate and change the culture behind, in this case, our educational environments. So we believe that it is important to work with the whole school community, so these interventions are actually sustainable and their effects can be sustainable throughout across time. So what we found from these interventions, these studies that we've conducted, is that on the one hand, promoting and cultivating compassion towards oneself, as Reggie mentioned, the inner work is crucial, is fundamental to then we can express that and manifest that towards others and towards the community and society. So we found with teachers that when they undergo this compassion-focused intervention, it's an 8-week intervention, their compassion motivations and actions are improved towards others, but also towards themselves. They become less fearful and less resistant of compassion. They become they feel more safe in both their overall social environment, but also more safe within the school environment. And they also feel less threatened within the educational setting, within the school. So this is reflected then on an improvement on the quality of their relationship with the pupils and with their colleagues, but also in their levels of mental health and well-being. So we found significant reductions in levels of depression, of anxiety, of burnout of these teachers, along with improvements in well-being indicators. So this is when we look at these psychological well-being indicators, and this is what we found. But we also have been trying to explore the impact of cultivating compassion on a range of biophysiological and also epigenetic indicators. And we have preliminary data from an ongoing project that, in line with what Tanya has found with her amazing in her amazing resource project, is that cultivating compassion, in this case in teachers, has it has the ability to change your physiology. So it improves your autonomic functioning, so the way it improves your heart rate variability, the way you're able to regulate stress. It has an impact on a range of indicators of inflammation in your body, so it seems to reduce inflammation and also improve antiviral responses. And it also seems to have an impact on gene expression, on how certain genes that we have related to how our bodies respond to stress, inflammation, viruses, bacteria, how they work. So this intervention seems to modulate. When you cultivate compassion, the changes that people experience and at a subjective and interpersonal level, they seem to have this underlying biophysiological impact, which also seems to be translated in how their genes are expressed even. So this is the work that we've done on teachers, but we also have started, in this case, this work has been done by, the children's work has been done by Professor Frankie Meratos at the UK. And so she has already piloted a compassion mind training interventions for pupils. And she found an improvement of prosocial behavior after this intervention with the children, an improvement in the classroom environment, and also this intervention seems to protect children from deterioration in their mental health across time in comparison to a control group. So cultivating compassion, in this case, in a school environment, seems to be able to promote the human qualities that may be essential to promote societal change, promote cooperation, compassion towards others, compassion towards oneself. It improves interpersonal relationships. It helps us regulate our difficult emotions, and it seems to improve or facilitate this shift from a competitive mindset to a cooperative, pro-social way of living and inhabiting ourselves and the world.
Thank you, Marcella. And it's a great place for you to finish that on, because bringing the mentioning of the competitive and the cooperative mindset. I know Frankie, as you mentioned her, she's particularly interested in how these interventions can shape the way that we think about how we raise and educate children. And it relates as well to your work, Tanya, on the caring economy, and I suppose the motivations again and values that we are using to shape this huge nebulous structure that informs and structures so much of our lives. So what do you as a caring economy, and how would people feel it if they were living in one?
Yeah, so I mean, perhaps just as a disclaimer, I'm not an economist, right? So I'm a scientist working, like, Marcella, on the effects of compassion training, on brain and behavior and immune system and epigenetics. And so in the resource project, we followed 9 months people, and that is my focus. But I was in an economic department, and I had to learn all these Homoeconomicus and our economic backbone formula, because I wanted to interact in an interdisciplinary network, which was about how does cooperation flourish and when does it break down. And so we were psychologists, neuroscientists, and economists working together on that question. And what I noticed is that the whole backbone of our modern economy, which is neoliberal Homo economicus, is completely wrong. I mean, incredibly wrong in terms of if a psychologist was look at it. So they have, still this kind of assumption that, there is some kind of stable preferences, and these preferences are usually optimizing your income, right? Your utility. And then it's context insensitive, and it is, endogenously giving. It comes from somewhere and cannot really change. There is no notion of plasticity, really. So it is really incredible. And we have then started working on models which are more informed about how we really are with humans. So we put a motivational approach instead. And as, Debbie and Marcella already said, when you look at most of our system, not just the economic and financial system, but scientific system, healthcare system, educational system, they are mostly based on what we call incentive motivation. So it's power, it's achievement, it's consumption. So Homo economicus, the utility function of Homo economicus is mostly based on consumption, right? You want to consume more. But if you look at the psychology and neurobiology, we are motivated by huge amount of other motives or motivation systems. So we are motivated by care, by altruism, by affiliation, by threat. I mean, we have a huge amount of different systems. And our system we have built in the world, not just the economic financial system, are based mostly on power, achievement, and consumption, right? That's where all the time. And so imagine on an individual, but also macro level, are out of balance if we are not sometimes also activating care and affiliation system, right? Which are relying on relationships, we are relying on compassion, which relying on real altruism, on an idea of common good. So we have started working to rewrite basically this utility function and adding many more utility function, which are context sensitive, which can change depending on where you are and what makes sense. And we are advocating that you have to put care back into the equation of our bigger systems. And if you put back care into the equation of healthcare, education system, economy, finance, obviously you have to change the institutional design, the shareholder agreements, and a lot, of laws as well. But that's not my specialty because I'm a psychologist, neuroscientist. So what I developed over many, many years is how can you, through inner change, basically activate the care system, right? How can you rebalance within a person, from achievement, motivation, consumption, threat, stress, to a more, we mode. And there we have, developed a lot of practices. And the latest practices I have developed in the COVID pandemic is intersubjective partner practice. We call them dyadic practice. So it's not like you do practice alone, as in most compassion-based training, but you do it with a partner 12 minutes every day. And we did that online during the pandemic because we wanted to counteract loneliness, depression, anxiety, and all what was kind of, there is a real pandemic of mental health problems, worldwide. And what we could show, we have just the data coming out, that through these 12 minutes little partner exercise, you can actually reduce loneliness, depression, anxiety, stress to 30% on the real cortisol axis, so like the hormonal axis of stress. And that is much more efficient than just mindfulness practice you do alone. So what I'm saying is that to really change system, we also need to practice, not just alone, but within a system, right? Either with a person in terms of intersubjective practice or with a whole system, so that we can really effectively change these social elements, and not just ourselves in isolation. And so we're working now, Marcela, we should meet on bringing these diets into, healthcare and schools. So also to teachers and to children to see whether, yeah.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, I'm very happy if these panels can function as networking too. So that also then sort of brings me to my question for Mick, which is related to, I suppose, how we use the lessons from psychology to inform the way that we want our governments to govern and our societies to function. And you literally wrote the book on it, about putting psychology at the heart of social change. What are the key lessons that you think we need to be learning as we're trying to, build this project, I suppose, which is about shifting cultures and values in society?
I think one of the key lessons is about embedding it really at the very beginnings of children's development. And it's been wonderful hearing about the work that's been done in schools. And even before that, there's the positive parenting interventions. We know from psychology and the research that's been done that we can help to bring up kids who are more caring, more empathic, more understanding of each other. And it seems crazy to me that our education systems teach kids about history, they teach them about geography, but they don't teach them about themselves and about relationships and about being able to relate in the world in ways that can lead to more compassionate, cooperative, supportive behaviors that can really bring out the best in everyone. So I think that if we can embed those in schools, and I do think that, it was lovely hearing what Debbie was saying, but I think the progressive parties like Labour and the Green in the UK who really believe in compassion and really believe that we can work together, that we don't have to be this kind of Hobbesian model of people who are fighting against each other. I'd really like to hope that they can lead the way, firstly in implementing and supporting and funding when they're in government, and my hope personally is that they will be in government soon, that program, so that it is really embedded right from the very beginnings of our education system. But also in terms of, and again, as Debbie was saying, an emotionally literate politics, where politicians are talking to each other in ways that are based on understanding, that aren't about shaming, demonizing, putting down the other. I think when people see things like Prime Minister's Question Time, and people see the way politicians can talk to each other, it really doesn't set a great example for how we can dialogue, how we can be compassionate, how we can be comparing. And I think if politicians can show, and again, perhaps if the progressive parties can lead the way in showing that we can do politics without turning the others into our enemies, without always looking at the bad in others, but looking at what's also right in the others, and how others are trying their best, then that can really lead us onto the path towards something that is more compassionate. I think right at the beginning, Reggie was saying it's a hard and it's a challenging path, and it's not about being smiling and just loving and disregarding all of our more painful, difficult, tragic emotions, but it is showing that we can communicate with each other, we can learn and we can listen from each other, and that there's the possibility of, as Debbie was saying, leadership in taking that forward.
Thank you, Mick. And I'm going to turn to that question just briefly then around, I suppose, politics and political change, because one of the more obvious kickbacks that I suppose we get, especially from Compassion in Politics, which I've worked on for a number of years, is, you know, the system's always been like that, or the other side won't play fair, so we've got to play dirty. Added to which, there's always things sort of like, well, what would you do about a major conflict or a dictator? How does compassion relate to those very tough, knotty questions? So I might go to you first, Debbie, and then tee up Reggie afterwards, because I put Reggie on the spot right at the beginning. Debbie, how would you respond to some of those challenges?
It's not an easy one, but I'll give you an example of what some of us are doing in Parliament in relation to the Israel-Gaza conflict. And that is, again, working with our leaders so that they are aware that we need to recognize our common humanity, and look at ways where that can be enabled. Something I'm doing personally is trying to organise a Parliamentarians for Peace event, which is we're hoping to have on the 11th of December. So it's just after, it's actually Sunday, which is the International Human Rights Day, which marks the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's the 75th anniversary. So it's about all parliamentarians, not necessarily leaders, official leaders of parties, but anybody that believes in our common humanity, how we actually got the Universal Declaration in the first place, how it came out of the Second World War, and we all said never again. Wanting to work together, recognise, as I say, our common humanity, that we are all equal as human beings. So it's trying to focus on something that's positive, and trying to have that to stand out amongst all the horrors that we're seeing daily on our television screens and so on. And that's also, thinking about the power aspect that you were talking about, Mick, and I absolutely agree with you. You may think, oh, MPs have loads and loads of powers. In the current system we have, we don't. And this is, again, how we need to change in terms of our, how politics is organised. There needs to be greater power sharing, and I think this needs to go not just from our politics, and Matt and I have talked about this a lot, not just from our formal politics, but also right down to individuals, so that in the UK, where we have a first past the post system, we need to ensure that people see a value in actually vesting their power in somebody, but also looking at other opportunities for that power to be shared on an ongoing way during the parliamentary cycle. So I'm a real fan of citizens' assemblies, so that people have the opportunity to actively engage, to have control over or involvement in an issue that they feel passionate about. So there's, as I say, I gave you an example there of how I think, in the absolute horrors of what we're seeing at the moment, we can do something that's symbolic, but that it also really, it has front and center what needs to happen, that we all believe in our common humanity, whether you're a Palestinian or Israeli, that we are all equal as individuals, and that needs to be recognized. Frankly, it's sometimes not.
Thank you, Debbie. And definitely, I think that speaks to the power of compassion, just being this value that is sort of encourages you, I suppose, to see the whole of humanity, but it also is something proactive you can work for without having to get dragged into those sorts of focusing on the negative. Yeah. Reggie, did you want to just come in on this one as well?
Yeah, I want to thank Mick for mentioning the word emotionally literate politics, which may seem like an asymptote or a fool's errand to some extent. But I approach politics not from the elected official's perspective. Like, as an activist, you would expect me to say this. Like, especially in the United States, what we're focused on, or what I'm trying to focus on, is demanding better from people, right? You know what I mean? Like, reminding folks, at least in our system, if you don't like how someone's doing, you can take their job. You know, like, if someone's not performing up to the levels that you hope for, you can, like, organize, get the numbers, and vote them out. You know what I mean? It's really, I mean, we did that with our last president, right? So I think that it's imperative. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. Because Matt, as you know, I straddle both like activist and practitioner space. Like, I'm the hybrid of like dharmic yoga teacher and like hardcore activist who speaks truth to power. I taught at Kripalu Institute for Yoga and Health this past weekend, and at the beginning of my, I did an impromptu gong session for people stressed out. I was like, these sounds will like lower your nervous system and give you good rest. And at the beginning of my remarks, I said the following. I was just like, so thank you all for coming. This is freely offered based on my spiritual practice. And if you care to donate, Black labor has been exploited for centuries in the United States. And people are like, oh, that's bold. I was like, it's true. So my compassionate action is saying you are welcome to be in this space. And if you're coming here to exploit or be entertained, I'm not your magical Negro. That is a very compassionate thing to say, right? It's saying these are the boundaries and this is the way with which I will be operating. If you do not like that, you can leave the room, right? You know, people mistake compassion as this squishy, touchy-feely thing. Sometimes compassion requires you to stand up for the downtrodden. You know, like in my activist work, I speak up for those who aren't spoken for. Right, that's compassion, not like, oh, everyone, let's just like touch hands and hope everything works out. No, elected official, you're screwing this up, and we demand better on behalf of these people. Like, speaking with that level of power and passion is probably quite possibly the most compassionate act that you can do, right? As opposed to, oh, I know you've had a bad day. Let's talk about this on Twitter. Like, we've occupied people's offices and been like, yo, this ain't cool. You know, like, peace and compassion, at least in my understanding of them, require a level of agency and sometimes confrontation, especially to disrupt harmful systems that isn't talked about, right? And so, like, from an activist perspective, I believe, and this is what I'm hopeful and working on in the United States, is can we be compassionate, use compassion as a tool of disruption for systems that are causing harm. So if there is not emotional literacy in politics, can we as an activist community go to these elected officials and being like, you're not doing what we asked you to do. You're not doing what the situation requires. How can this be changed? And if it's not changed, like, we're coming for your job. You know, like that's probably a very compassionate way. It seems antithetical in the spiritual bypass practitioner space. Like, oh, let's just hold hands and hope this works out. No, like, sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is like, you're effing this up and you're on notice. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Reggie. Yeah, and so important that you brought us onto action as well, being, you know, as being the tool of compassion. I've let the discussion around what we want to create run on a little bit, but I think along the way we've certainly been picking up small parts of what we want to talk about in the second half, which is around how we get there. And I was going to come to you first, Marcella, which is if you could just give us kind of a brief overview, I suppose, of where our knowledge is at in terms of how we can move people to a space of compassion. What do we know about what works in terms of helping people cultivate or realize their compassion?
Sure. I'm just not sure. Mick was asking in the chat to say something, I think, in response to Reggie.
Yeah, do you want to go first,
right.
Mick?
I'm happy to.
Just very quickly, I just want to say I really agreed with what Reggie said. And I think for me, you know, compassion doesn't mean being pink and fluffy and rainbows and unicorns. I think one really helpful way of understanding it is the difference between people's experiences and people's behaviors and really distinguishing between those two. I think compassion is about a deep understanding and empathy with people's experiences, whatever they are, whether it's anger, whether it's upset, whether it's a sense of hurt. Compassion means really being there and recognizing the deep humanity of how people experience things and not judging that. Nobody's experiences are ever right or wrong. But when it comes to behaviors, and when it comes to things like behaving, for instance, in racist ways, behaving in ways that harm other people, implementing injustices, setting up policies that, as Debbie was saying earlier, lead to massive inequalities between people, that is wrong. And we can judge that and we can challenge that and critique that and even fight against it. But in all of that, I don't think it means we have to demonize people. We can still hold people as human beings, as legitimate, valiant human beings who are doing things for their reasons. Everybody's doing things for their reasons ultimately that we all share, for self-worth, for connection, for a sense of meaning. You know, we have a common set of human wants and needs, but we can really challenge people out of that in terms of how they're trying to get there, and ways that can really, really harm people. Sorry, Marcella, thank you for picking up on that. Back to you.
No, not at all, Mick. Thank you for that.
No, not at all. Thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to say that Reggie and Mick, that's so in line as well, like perfectly. It just touches on how I see compassion as well, and what I know about what the science of compassion has shown us. Compassion is not the same as kindness, as pity, as being nice, fluffy. You know, there's nothing to do with that. It is about courage. It is about having the courage to deal with the callous side of our human minds. With the and we need the main ingredient for that is courage, is stepping up, is agency. And so it's not about being nice, it's not about love. Compassion, the places where it is most needed, it is actually towards either the parts of ourselves that we dislike, or to work with divisions, with inequality, with what is most harmful in our the harmful effects of our human minds in our society and in our world. So I just wanted to say that that's at the core of why compassion is important, and how I see that compassion can change society, because only with courage we will be able to actually instigate that type of change. In terms of the science of compassion, we know across fields that compassion has a transformative effect on our individual well-being and mental health, but also interpersonally in our relationships with others. So we know that compassion can reduce, cultivating compassion can reduce our own individual suffering, psychological suffering, and promote also our physical health, our biophysiological, the way our body physiologically regulates stress, inflammation, adversity. But compassion can also impact the way we regulate our emotions, our pro-social behaviors. It can impact how we relate to one another and promote this shift that Tanya talked about, from competitiveness to care and caring and affiliation. And this is at the core of what we are as human beings. This is a central motivation that we all share as human beings, to care and be cared for. And this motivation has enabled us to evolve and survive until this day. So we know this, and we know this from intervention studies, so studies that focus on cultivating compassion in different settings, in the general population, in clinical populations, in the educational sector, in the organizational sector working with corporations. We know this from different sectors of this transformative power of compassion within and outside of ourselves. And we also know, for example, we conducted a multinational study during the COVID-19 pandemic across the globe in 23 countries, and we found that compassion is a universal protective effect against the toxic impact that the pandemic had on our mental health, well-being, and experiences of social safeness. So regardless of where you are in the world, if you were able to be compassionate towards yourself, to direct compassion to others, and to receive compassion from others, you would be protected against these pervasive impacts of compassion. So we know all of this from science. So we need to start to be able to implement this and disseminate this across sectors in society, from the individual level to the community level, to the country level, and to a world level. So we need nations, we need politicians to wake up to how compassion can transform not only our individual lives, but also how we operate as human beings in a society, in a community, in a nation, with each other in the world.
Thank you, Marcella. And so that brings very nicely on to Tanya, who's been there in the room with people, including world leaders, or certainly world economics leaders, trying to have these conversations, I suppose. And I wondered what your learnings from that process have been. How willing to wake up are the people who are in institutions vested, I suppose, in sometimes maintaining the status quo or existing off old models of doing things?
So again, like my domain is what Marcella just said. So I mostly focused on bringing in big studies, 300 or thousands people through these programs, 9 months mental training programs, or 10 weeks, or whatever. So what my observation is that if you just talk about, whenever I talk about showing the brains, how the structure of the brain changes through compassion training or perspective taking training or empathy training or mindfulness training, people are already, it's a door opener, right? It's a little bit like, oh, wow, I also have a brain. So if I can really show how the structure of brain changes through just 30 minutes of practice, perhaps it works for me as well, right? So I think the first experience I have is that if you bring the hardcore science, especially the biological science of compassion, into the boardroom, people who are skeptic and think it's some esoteric, whatever, woo-woo, they start to understand, oh, that's not esoteric. That's something which is just biologically and just secular and just something everyone can do, right? Whether you are religious or not. So that's my first thing. The second thing, when we really, at the World Economic Forum, offered practice, the first year we had a little mini room, and there were only, let's say, the wives of the big company boss coming to meditate, right? It was still very small. But then the second year we had to book the bigger room, and then the third year we were in the main hours of the World Economic Forum and not at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we had to get the biggest room, and there were queues already in front of the room wanting to get into it. So my experience is just get them to the practice, just let them practice, and then here we go, because we are all humans, and once you are in the practice, you experience the benefit immediately to yourself, and then there is no doubt about it anymore. So when I did, for example, this COVID study like Marcella, we did a COF social project where we just randomly selected Berliners from the city register. So we had tube driver, we had people who had never ever done any inner work, we had politician, just random, right? We had just Berlin. And then you know, after tracking them and seeing that they got all more lonely and depressed and anxious over every lockdown, we just offered mental training, and they had never done that, right? Some people had never ever heard about it, and they trusted us because we were a scientific study. And then they just did the practice, and it's amazing after just 2 weeks what I heard in terms of feedback. When people do these diet every day, you have tears in your eyes, because it's just so life-changing, really, with just a little bit of practice. So my experience is get people to practice. And if people ask me to give talks, I always say, look, I can give a talk, and that's nice. I've given thousands in my life. No, I can show you how brain changes and so on. But what I would like, can we have a workshop afterward? You know, can you engage the people into some practice? Because it's only through the first person experience of it that you lose the fear of it, that you understand how easy in a way it is, and that everyone had this capacity, right? And then you are hooked. I mean, usually after 3 weeks of diet course, people get addicted to doing these partner-based dietic work, right? They don't want to stop anymore. I just did a huge masterclass with 8-week dieting with healthcare provider, you know, like healthcare staff from hospitals and nurses and doctors. And 2/3 of them continue self-organizing their daily practice, even after 3 months of the masterclass having ended, right? So that just shows that once you're over the hill, you just want to continue.
Yeah, the immersive experience really is powerful. Thank you, Tanya. I'm aware that we are coming up to the top of the hour when we are going to finish. I think if people are happy, we'll run over, except I know Debbie definitely has to leave. So my last question for you, Debbie, was around the political change that we need to see for this kind of world that we're painting to exist. Oh, Debbie has gone, actually. I've just checked. Sorry, she's left. Okay, no worries. So I'm going to turn that over to Mick instead. Mick, can you perhaps comment a little bit, I suppose, on the changes that we might need to see at the political level to actually make all of this possible?
So I think at the political level, we need to see a change in the agendas and the manifestos for government. I think for me, 2 things, as I was saying before, that we can absolutely do is invest in positive parenting, bringing young children into the world in ways that are secure and supportive. Because I think if there is that support for children, then, and if they feel secure, then they'll have the ability for compassion. Somebody who psychologically is insecure and doesn't have a strong attachment, is fearful for themselves and struggling themselves, is going to find it much more difficult to be compassionate towards others than someone who comes into the world and their parents have learned how to really look after them and care for them. And then, as we've already talked about, there's clear evidence of compassion and emotional literacy programs in schools that can help children learn to develop those social and emotional competencies. Very much also, as well as learning to understand others, it's about learning to understand themselves, learning to understand their process. Compassion requires self-compassion. It requires us to understand our needs and wants and emotions, so that we can recognize more clearly what those are in others. And governments do have the ability to make those changes that can allow those processes to happen. So there's a real possibility for compassion to be something that can be there in the future. And then I think thirdly, and Debbie's already talked about this, is around social and economic equality. You know, compassion and equality go together. If you've got inequality, then in many ways compassion would be almost a kind of acceptance of incompassion. It would be allowing incompassion to happen. To be compassionate to others, as Reggie and others have talked about, isn't just about saying something or perceiving something. It's about really making actions to change other people's lives for the better. So that where we've got, for instance, in the UK, a good national health service, or in other parts of the world, where we've got supportive care systems for people and for older adults, when people can come into the world and have in the world more economic, social and political equality, then it means that they can have the confidence and the security to extend compassion to others and to relate to others in ways that do have that deep caring understanding that political inequality, social economic inequality is like the waves that rock a boat from side to side, that once you have that, it just starts wave after wave of fighting and challenge and misunderstanding. But if we have the much calmer seas of equality, then compassion can really emerge through that.
Thank you, Mick, and thank you for filling in where I thought Debbie was. Perfect answer. So we're going to be able to wrap up quite soon, but there were a couple of questions from the audience that I just wanted to get to. One of those was directed at Marcella, but I actually think if anyone else wanted to come in on this, you'd be more than welcome, which was, do you think the most effective way to implement the transformative effects we're after are from the top down or the grassroots upwards? Marcella, you come in first, but Reggie, you may definitely want to come in on this as well.
Yeah. Well, on my view is that both are important. So we need bottom up, we need grassroots, we need to start with, for example, if you think about a school context, we need, yes, to start at the schools and work with the children and the parents, but we also need to work with the teachers, because if the change is not at and the boards of the schools, because if this change, if there is no shift in the environment to these more compassionate ethos, then changes will likely not be sustainable. But this is not enough, because we can work individually. For example, we do that in our schools in the central region of Portugal, for example. But if this changes are then not implemented and promoted from the stakeholders, the institutional boards that can actually decide to implement this into, for example, pupil curriculums and into teachers' education, then this work is not enough. So we need both approaches, I believe, to ingrain compassion into the tissue. Tissue is not the right word. I'm missing it in Portuguese. Into the fabric of our society. That's the right word. So, and for that to happen, we need, I believe, to work at both levels.
Thank you, Marcella. Reggie.
Yeah, I'll quickly add that it's not either or, it's both and, right? So you have to have the engagement. I mean, I'll give you a quick example from my lived experience. So I didn't start teaching in earnest until the pandemic, because I saw the suffering in the world and realized that my yogic and meditative practice would be of service to other people. And so I started teaching on a grassroots level, like just threw up a Zoom room and people came and those sorts of things. That consistent opening to other people has impacted tens of thousands of people, some of them elected officials, right? So working at a grassroots level, me being of service to my community has allowed me to have greater impact. Like I've taught members of Congress, like the former Speaker of the House, her daughter used to come to my meditation classes during the pandemic, right? And so like doing what you can for your community can have the impact of reaching the top, but if you don't serve the roots, then the flower won't flourish.
Perfect. Thank you, Reggie. So we're going to wrap up with one question to everyone, and if you could sort of give it maybe 30 seconds for each person, just so we don't run over too long. But I wanted to ask everyone, what would be the one thing, classic question, you would encourage anyone listening to do? Tanya, though, there was a specific question around the practices you mentioned quite early on. I think this was around the COVID study with partners, which was, do you think it was effective because of the practices themselves, or because of the fact that it just created a point of common humanity? So why don't you start answering that one, Tanya, then we'll go round everyone and they can answer on the question of what one action should people take.
Yeah, okay. So this partner-based dyadic, what we did in the COVID study, we directly compared it to 12-minute classic mindfulness done alone. So we have a direct comparison of what is the difference between a socio-emotional partner-based intersubjective practice with a comparable practice, same teacher, same length, 12 minutes a day, same app. And it is very clearly the intersubjective nature which boosts things like compassion, empathy, loneliness, get people out of loneliness, bring in resilience, optimism, and so on. So we have data to show basically that mindfulness obviously also does nice things, but this intersubjective aspect is more powerful when it comes to intersubjective emotions and intersubjective motivation, relational aspects, right? If a lot of our suffering is actually based in suffering of the attachment system, no? Like that we have been, traumatized in relationship with our parents, with, our superiors, schools. And so if you want to heal that, you need to heal it relational and not alone. You can only heal things where they originated, and most of it is in relationship. You are hurt in relationships in any kind of any way. And so this partner-based practice itself is the powerful element, that there is another being. Okay, and what would I suggest to everyone? I mean, I think we have literally everyone the responsibility to create a more compassionate world in waking up every morning and trying from scratch, right? Just waking up and saying, okay, how can I put my intentions and my being into the service of compassion in the world? And if I did something wrong, okay, just stand up again and try to do it better, right? Don't beat yourself up. Just try again. And so I think if everyone does that, we could have, big hope.
Yeah, maybe we could get that recorded for everyone to be able to listen to when they wake up in the morning. Ideal. Shall we go? Marcella, do you want to go next?
Oh, you are muted, Marcella. You're muted.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, Tanya. I would say, like Tanya, start with yourself and connect with this power, this innate power that we have, because compassion can be a human superpower, and connect with that, harness that, and use that for your own your own personal life, your inner life, but also open your eyes to the world around you. We can all have an impact on others, near or far. We sometimes just need to truly open our eyes and learn to tolerate being with what's difficult, because addressing suffering is a difficult task, inner and out. So yes, work with yourself and open your eyes to where you can make a change, small or big. We can all make a change.
Thank you, Marcella. And Reggie, and we might go to Mick if he can come back on. I think he's had technical problems, but looks like we might finish with Reggie. Mick's back. Anyway, Reggie, you go first anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to give gratitude for the chance to be of service. Matt, if you ever need something at the last minute, given my life as a political operative, I got you. All right, so just know that. Yeah, and thank you all for your insights, for your work, and for sharing your work with us, right? So as an organizer, however I can be of service to you, holler at me. And if you can be of service to me, I'm gonna definitely reach out. So don't worry about that. I just want to say clearly, like, that we're all in this together, whether we like it or not. And that's a good thing. Marcella talked about the compassion superpower. The thing that we have to remember is that, like, the body is hardwired to respond positively to compassion. It's in our physiology. It's in our biomechanics. It's in our biochemistry. And so, like, convincing people to get in touch with their nature may seem daunting, but it's actually on our side because it's how we're wired. And we have been deluded into thinking that all these other me versus you suck, men versus women, all this black versus white, like, we've been deluded into thinking that's how things have always been. But if it's not in our biochemical physiology, then how has it always been? It's a delusion that has been perpetuated, that us stepping into the breach in service to ourselves and other people can disintegrate.
Thank you, Reggie. And Mick, are you there?
I'm here.
Great. Yeah. Did you hear the question, by the way? Yes, can hear you. Yeah.
I didn't. Sorry, my technology's been terrible.
Oh, that's okay. It was just, what would be the one message you'd leave people listening with?
I think talk about difficult stuff. I think really go learn, develop the skills, and let's find ways of talking about the painful, the difficult, the emotional, the all those feelings that we really find difficult to share, because compassion can't just be about compassion about the good things, the nice things that we like in each other. It's got to be compassion for those really dark and challenging depths. And I think developing the skills to be able to express that, to hold that, to hear that in others, and to be able to be and love others with all that there is what ultimately is going to change us and change the world. And thank you so much, everybody, for this dialogue. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Mick, for those extremely wise and thoughtful words, and thank you everyone who is out there today for being with us, especially to the panel and to Debbie, obviously, who had to leave early. And special thoughts for you, Mick. I know what is a very difficult time, but
Thanks.
Appreciated you being here so much. We're going to close up. So I think that's everything. There's been a few links posted in the chat, but if you do basically need anything followed up, just get in touch at info@globalcompassioncoalition.org or visit the website and you might be able to find it there. Thanks, everyone, and see you soon.
Thank you, Matt. Bye. Everyone. Thank
Love
you,
and
everyone.
gratitude.
Thank you.
Keep the faith.